When John says the Word became flesh, he used a Greek word with which those in his culture were very familiar. It was the word logos. And the word logos is translated into English as word. In Greek philosophy, logos was the rational principle that gave order to the universe. The abstract principle that became known as God, or equated with God. Before Jesus became Emmanuel, before Jesus became God with us, before Jesus took on flesh and blood, Jesus was called the Word. Verse 1 says that in the beginning was the Word. If Jesus is the Word that became flesh, then in the beginning was Jesus. Jesus was with God, and God was with Jesus. Jesus was not created at the time of his conception, but had been with his heavenly Father ever since the beginning of time. John 1:1 says, "In the beginning was the Word." Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God." In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. At the time of creation, all things were made through Jesus. I don't believe that it's any coincidence that in the book of Genesis, in the creation story from Genesis 1, that it says that God spoke the world into being. As he spoke the world, spoke the Word, that Word was Jesus. All that was created happened through Jesus. Genesis says that in verse 3, "And God said, let there be light." Verse 6, "And God said, let there be an expanse between the waters and the sky." Verse 9 said, "And God said." Verse 11, "Then God said." Verse 14, verse 20, verse 24, verse 26, verse 29, "And God said, and God said." Verse 10 says that Jesus was in the world, and even though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. Even though the world rejected Jesus, God's plan was that Jesus would bridge God to the world. Jesus, being God come in human form, would be the way that God is able to connect with human beings. Jesus is described as the light of the world. But unfortunately, we would rather live in darkness than in the light. Jesus put it this way in John 3:19 and 20. "This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed." Light and darkness are a recurring theme in the Gospel of John. People love one or the other. People love light, people love God's way, or people love darkness. They reject God's way. But they can't embrace both. Max Lucado tells the story of a tribe of people who lived in the darkness of a cold cave. It would seem that the only sounds that came out of their cold, dark cave was mourning and moaning and whining and crying. The people knew nothing else. It was all that they did. It was all that they knew. The sounds in the cave were mournful, but they didn't know it because they had never known joy. The spirit in the cave was that of death, but they didn't know it because they had never really experienced life. Well, one day, the cave dwellers heard a different voice. A stranger had come into their cave and had become aware of their plight, of their coldness and their darkness. And so he said, I have hope to share with you. I have something to share with you that is going to make your life different. And as those in the cave talked to the stranger, they said, what are you going to do? What do you bring for us? And they could see his silhouette in the darkness. They could see a pile at his feet, and he bent over and made the pile larger. And they said, "What is it that you bring to us?" And the stranger then lit a match. And he lit the fire that was there in the cave. And as the fire began to burn and light began to fill the space and warmth began to come from the fire, the people who lived in the cave, they backed away. They said, the light is too bright. We can't stand to look at it. And they said, "Please take it away. Take it away." The stranger said, But this light will help you to see. This light will help you to become warmer. And yet those cave dwellers were afraid of the light. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. Finally, one of the cave dwellers stepped forth in faith and got a little bit closer to the fire. And she said, "It no longer hurts my eyes. The light's helping me to see." She said, "The light is giving off a warmth that it's helping me to warm up. It's helping me to feel better." And she said to the stranger, "Why won't anyone else come to the light?" The stranger said they would rather be cold than to change. They would rather live in darkness than to step into the light. You know, how is it that we respond to Jesus? How is it that we respond to His light and His truth? Would we rather not deal with it? Because if we deal with His truth, it might mean that we would have to change. You know, Jesus was present from the very beginning of time. All that was created through Him. Jesus came into the world as Emmanuel. And verse 10 reveals that Emmanuel is often ignored. It said He is in the world, and though the world was made through Him, the world does not recognize Him. Some ignore Jesus, while verse 11 says that others will reject Him outright. He came to His own, but His own did not receive Him. Some ignore Jesus, some reject Jesus, but verse 12 says that some receive Him. Look at verse 12. It says, "Yet to all who receive Him, to those who believe in His name, He gave the right to become children of God."